welcome to the Emerging Purpose podcast, where we explore the transformative journeys that shape our lives and help us discover our deepest purpose. I'm your host, Greg Donaldson, and each episode I dive into conversations with individuals who are dedicated to personal and collective transformation. Today's guest is someone who sits at the fascinating intersection of cultural commentary, consciousness exploration, and sense-making in our rapidly changing world. Alexander Beiner is a writer, facilitator, and cultural thinker who has dedicated his work to helping us navigate what he sees as a civilizational level crisis of ideas. Alexander is the founder of Kainos, a media platform and studio that tells stories to help people make sense of our time of upheaval and imagine new futures. He is also the author of The Bigger Picture, How Psychedelics Can Help Us Make Sense of the World, published by Hay House, where he explores how psychedelic experiences might offer tools for addressing some of our biggest cultural and political challenges. Many of you might know Alexander from his previous work as co-founder of Rebel Wisdom, the influential media platform he created with filmmaker David Fuller, which became known for moving beyond ideological thinking and engaging with transformative ideas emerging from the margins of culture. Alexander also serves as co-executive director of Breaking Convention, Europe's largest conference on psychedelic science and culture, and he's the Chief Sense-Making Officer at Small Giants Academy. His writing appears regularly on his Substack newsletter, which reaches tens of thousands of subscribers, and he's been featured across numerous podcasts exploring topics from psychedelic culture to truth-finding in polarized times. What makes Alexander's work particularly compelling is his ability to weave together insights from psychology, philosophy, spirituality, and alternative economics in ways that feel both grounded and visionary. He's someone who doesn't just observe cultural shifts, he actively participates in shaping the conversations that could define our collective future. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Alexander Beiner. So, are you reading anything at the moment? What are you into at the moment? You got any favourite?
Yeah, what am I reading? I am reading. I'm reading a sci-fi book, really mad sci-fi book, which is really good, called The Excordia. So I'm reading that, and then I'm reading like a whole bunch of different. Because I'm writing a book about. I'm doing a book proposal for a book about AI and spirituality and AI and religion. So then I'm also reading this very academic sociology book about AI and religion, which is kind of the only one that's come out.
Okay.
It came out when did it come out? Like three weeks ago. So I'm kind of getting through that as well, which is interesting in its own way. But the sci-fi book is a bit more, I don't know, Moorish, let's say.
Yeah. Who's that by?
It's by Seth Dickinson, who wrote, really, really good trilogy of books. Kind of political intrigue books set in like a different, kind of like similar to our world, but it's set kind of in like the late 1800s and what are sort of like Polynesian islands, and it's all about deep sort of diplomatic intrigue, but surprisingly very good. Yeah.
Amazing. Sounds really fascinating.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, so, well, thanks for agreeing to come and talk to me on the podcast. Sort of really grateful to have you here and to get to hear a bit about obviously you said you're writing a new book, but you've the book that I've read of yours, The Bigger Picture, that's your first book, right? Is it? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
And I must say, it's such an inspiring book. I mean, it's one of those books that I was just, I kind of had to go through, and I was just highlighting. So I'm sure we won't.
Thank you. I'm glad.
We might not get to everything, but I mean, hopefully, we'll get to what's needed in this conversation. I'm sure we will.
Nice. Yeah. Well, thank you. Thanks. And yeah, it's good to reconnect, and looking forward to speaking, and then also exploring wherever the conversation goes. Yeah.
Great. Yeah. So this is the Emerging Purpose podcast, and I've sort of have a very I have a deep fascination with purpose. That's why I call my psychotherapy practice Emerging Purpose, because I have this sense that that it's a useful thing, but I'm not quite sure why. you know, and I think that's why I call it emerging purpose, because I feel like there's a sense that purpose is a thing that emerges and then disappears and then kind of comes up in other places in our lives, and then it's sort of like, you know, just shifts around all the time. And I mean, it might be a bit of a big question to open with, but I'm kind of like, I wonder what your thoughts are on purpose and your own personal relationship to purpose.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and quite poignant for me, I think, because what I've noticed is that when I feel a clear sense of purpose and I feel aligned to a greater purpose, something that is about not just me, although it is of course also about me, but it's about how I might do something that takes me beyond myself or has an impact beyond myself. That's when I feel most, I would say most alive, but also the word that comes up for me is I feel most at ease and clear. Like I know what I'm doing, where I'm going, and why. So I guess a sense of why and a sense of clarity around purpose feel quite related to me. You know, in a way, I associate purpose with why am I doing what I'm doing, and that helps me a lot if I can align to that. When I don't feel aligned to it, which is probably a good, I don't know what percentage of the time, but let's say a third of the time at least. I find things more difficult, and I find I'm more directionless, and I have less overall motivation because the motivation I feel when I am connected to my purpose is quite strong. It's a real sense, almost like I know exactly what to do before I have to make the decision. It's clear because it all kind of connects together. Yeah. Yeah,
that's nice. Yeah, so there's kind of some. I suppose what I'm hearing is, like you say, there's a sense of flow when you feel like you tap into it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And in terms of your kind of own life, in terms of like where you've got to right now, can you see a journey in terms of like purpose? Like, I mean, what's led you to write this book, for instance? Like,
yeah, I think there is a journey of purpose. You know, I mean, it's an interesting thing, writing and purpose for me, because I had a very strong sense when I was probably 9 years old that I wanted to be a writer, and got, you know, was an avid, both my parents are pretty avid readers, so there was a lot of encouragement of reading a lot, which I'm very grateful for. And then I don't know, it's been a lifelong compulsion, I would call it, or obsession, and like love, and, you know, so in that sense, writing kind of holds that, for me, a sense that it's part of my purpose is to write. But obviously writing itself is about expressing something, and in some way, I see writing as opening new possibilities in the world, in people's minds, in my own mind. It's a process for me of actually, if I want to understand what I think about something, I find it easiest to write about it. And then there's the actual subject matter of, you know, for example, the bigger picture of bringing together psychedelics and systems change, which are two of my great passions and love, and bringing those two worlds together, you know, and maybe also a sense that, well, two things. One being that my entry into the psychedelic world was when I was in university, and it was before really the first Johns Hopkins study came out in around 2006. Although actually Rick Strassman's DMT study was kind of the first, you know, a study of the psychedelic renaissance, but it was a bit different because it wasn't medical, right? So I think it had a different impact. But before that there was the wilderness time between the early 70s and the, you know, kind of early 2000s, when it was really the counterculture that was keeping the flame burning, and that counterculture was really defined by many things, but in part, you know, a rejection of embedded power structures, and people like Terence McKenna and Timothy Leary, who's a complicated character, but I think some of his writing is really great, or Ram Dass in slightly different ways, or, you know, and so they were people who were very influential on me. So was Anne Shulgin as well, more on the psychotherapeutic side. So that was quite a big influence, especially her work around the shadow. So for me, psychedelics were very much associated with social transformation and the potential of actually being able to change society. And I didn't see much of that conversation happening with the medicalization. over the decade and a half or so that then transpired when I was interested in psychedelics and writing about it and making films around it. So I really wanted to, I wouldn't say revive because I don't think it was dead, but sort of inject some energy into that side of the conversation, psychedelics, like instead of how to change your mind, how to change society, how to change culture.
Yeah, so from your own kind of personal interest in that kind of, like, as you say, like systems change and psychedelics, there was and obviously your love of writing. This is where they sort of gather together, and how you've created this book.
Yeah, and I think that talking about purpose, the deeper underlying purpose for me is around transformation, which I think psychedelics are transformative agents, or can be at least. And like many people, I think the system that we live in cannot last and needs to transform. So I really want to do whatever I can to make that transformation go in a direction that's more pro-social and more sustainable and more nature connected and more alive and human than the ways it could go. So I think that's the deeper drive for me, is I think always around novelty. Like Terence McKenna talked about novelty a lot, and that's a big thing for me. Is Ezra Pound, the modernist poet, he had this paper that he wrote, which was almost like the kind of theoretical underpinnings of modernism, and it was called "Make It New." And that was the line. It was like make it new, and I'm really taken by that sentiment because I think we live in a novelty famine, as I've called it. There's a sense of that culture is endlessly repeating dead symbols. There's a stuckness. There's an emptiness, which I think comes from capitalism. There's an emptiness to consumption, and many of us feel that something new needs to be born, but we're not sure what it is. In fact, we can't know what it is because it is truly new. It's and that's exciting to me. That's in fact endlessly exciting. It's the kind of I can never get boring by definition.
Yeah. There's such an aliveness in the sort of stepping into the unknownness. Yeah. You mentioned Ramdas there, and I love something that he talks about when he talks about the kind of religion and how you kind of see now these big churches that are kind of still repeating these sort of. I mean, I know that religion, there's a usefulness to it, and it brings people together, and there's like a community around that. And yet, there's on Sunday mornings, I think that sort of a lot of churches are just empty, and there's this sort of empty rituals that are still kind of going through. And I wonder if that kind of speaks to that in terms of like, then there's no making it new. It's a sort of sense of like, let's just repeat the old, and therefore it just kind of dies away slowly somehow. Yeah,
and Carl Jung talked about that distinction as creed and religion, and so creed is like what you're describing, the ritual without a deeper connection to the unconscious or to the sacred. And then religion, in his view, like real religion, is the experience of the divine, is the experience of transformation, is really the contact with the other. And I think the tricky thing in quite a secular society like the UK is that you like either there's a there, either there is something beyond us, or there isn't. And I think for me, I think there is, and I think there's no substitute for it. So a watered down versions of spirituality, which are like, well, we have the communitas element, we have the coming together, and we sing together, and that's nice, and that has nice psychological benefits. I'm a real, I don't like humanism as a worldview, and I don't like humanist ceremonies. I don't like the whole idea that we can replace religion through, like Alain de Botton says, art, or through different kinds of experiences like that. I think secular versions of religion are empty. They're like empty calories in a way. And there's only really, if we're talking about religion or we're talking about connection, there's just a real deal or there's no deal. And so I think religion, and it's interesting because religions like evangelical churches are gaining attendance in different parts of the world while other ones are losing attendance because, of course, they have a practice and a process associated with them that actually brings some sense of catharsis and rapture and connection to the Holy Spirit or the divine. I think there's a reason that people, actually choose the real deal over, behavioral moralizing and kind of empty ceremony.
Yeah. It's a real split there, isn't there? I suppose. As you said that, I was kind of thinking of the Church of, is it Santo Daime? Like
Santo Daime, yeah.
Yeah. Which is that kind of the mixture of the use of ritualistic use of ayahuasca, and also with a sort of Catholic background as well.
Yeah, it's kind of it's quite, as far as I understand it, it's Christian, and there's a mix of different belief systems and iconography and practices with the ayahuasca, and it's been very resilient. Yeah, I mean it's around and it stays around, and it's a proper religion. So yeah.
So I'd be really interested to hear actually. You talk about psychedelics, and obviously, like there's a big commentary on psychedelics in your book, and that's kind of what it's about, how it can help us in the world. And I just wondered, I'm really interested to like hear your own sort of, how did you come to it? How did you come to psychedelics yourself?
Probably like a lot of people initially, as I think I was 18. And took some mushrooms with friends in the Netherlands, initially out of curiosity, and had a real sense that maybe where it's different to some people is that I was really convinced that, and remain convinced to this day, that this was a very important experience, that it had much more to offer than just even knowing our own minds, that it was sacred, that it was powerful, that it was transformative. And for me, it felt very much like a homecoming. I felt very at home in this case, the psilocybin experience. It just felt very familiar. What's interesting, actually, it felt novel and familiar at the same time, which my friend John Vervaeke, who's a cognitive scientist, who I quote a few times in the book, his work is really brilliant. He, when I was talking to him about this, he got very excited because he was talking about this, that in cognitive science, that sense of novelty and familiarity is a very particular kind of experience that we really connect with as human beings. It's a very important experience, and I definitely had that. That was very much mine. And then I got very into like I said, the counterculture and the academia around psychedelics, and just became fascinated, particularly with philosophy and metaphysics, and spent a lot of time on internet forums discussing psychedelic philosophy. And I had a podcast then called Visionary Artists Podcast, which was about visionary art, because I've always been interested in art and aesthetics as well. And and then it kind of went from there. I got involved in Breaking Convention. I was, which is Europe's largest conference on psychedelic medicine and culture. I was a speaker at the first one in 2011, and then I joined the committee, and now I'm one of the 5 directors. So that's also been a thread running through my psychedelic life from fairly early. But so that's always been my way. And of course, for me personally, the experiences have been incredibly important and transformative on, my conception of who I am, my self-development. They were a gateway drug into meditation, definitely, and into therapy eventually, and personal growth work. And then, so that I really credit my psychedelic experiences with opening me to, and breathwork now. I'm a breathwork facilitator now too. So, it was really where it all began.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any thoughts on the sort of because like you're talking about the psychedelic renaissance now, and it's all coming through in terms of like the academic research and looking at it through that lens. Do you have any sort of thoughts on the recreational use of psychedelics?
Yeah, I'm not averse to the recreational use of psychedelics. I think realistically, it's where many people first access psychedelics. I personally not that interested in recreational use, and haven't been for even from the beginning, I think I took it quite seriously, maybe too seriously at times. But I definitely, yeah. I mean, I personally don't enjoy it that much. I think it's almost for me. Well, no, I was going to say a wasted opportunity, but that's not necessarily the case. It can be really fun and beautiful. And, we have, I think, in the West, this distinction between work and play that is also false in many ways. It's a very cultural kind of Protestant work ethic. Or there's a great model called Weird, Western educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic, which is about the kind of psychology people in the West have, by Joseph Henrich is the psychologist who wrote a book called The Weirdest People in the World, which is really worth checking out.
Okay.
But we have a particular we have a particular approach to life on the whole in Western cultures, where we split what's recreational and what's real work, and I think that owes probably a lot to the Protestant Reformation and a bunch of other factors. And so I don't think that distinction is, I think that distinction is sometimes true, but I think the distinction is misleading, because we know as well from a lot of research into human cognition and psychology that play is a very important way that we learn and change. And I know you as an actor, that's in a way there's that must have been a part of your experience as well. You're in a way playing, but the play can be serious as well. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that can very much happen with psychedelics. We can be having fun and recreational, and then it can lead us somewhere really deep that we might not have had access to, because our psychological defenses can be perhaps bypassed through play, in a way that nothing else can. So I don't want to, I want to make that distinction too. I think irresponsible use is something I'm not a fan of, or disrespectful use, because I think there is something sacred to psychedelics and sacred to the experience, and with anything sacred, it should be treated with respect.
Mm-hmm. No, I completely agree. I mean, I sort of feel like the only reason why I'm well, not the only reason, but part of the reason why I'm working on psychedelic trials, or working as a guide, or doing work as a as a psychotherapist doing integration, is because I raved in the 90s, and it was kind of like it although it was recreational, it was also something that was just a kind of wave of connection with people, and and I think part of that, like you say, the sort of misuse of it, or the kind of the further you go into these things, there can be a kind of like trying to find I've lost it, and you people are trying to get further and further into it without actually possibly doing the lower work and the higher work, I think in psychosynthesis we talk about this idea that if you expand into your higher unconscious, then you're also expanding into your lower unconscious. So there's kind of there's work to be done all over, really. And the danger could be just to keep staying up here, and trying to just to have a good time, without looking at the other stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's really important.
Yeah. So, so your book, how psychedelics can help us make sense of the world? I mean, that's such a massive question. It's like, I suppose the place to start with would be, what you call the meta crisis, right? Mm-hmm. And I just wondered, would you like to? Could you kind of tell the listeners and myself a little bit about what is that? What do you see as the meta crisis?
Yeah, that's a big question that I will. No, but a good question. It's very much a question that the book is centered around as well. So the meta crisis is a good way to start with the meta crisis is a concept by an author and kind of environmentalist called Timothy Morton, and he has this concept of hyper objects. And so he points out that some things are so big and interpenetrating and all-encompassing that you can't actually grab any part of it and say this is the thing, like evolution, for example. This is constantly moving through us and changing, and so I could pick up a platypus and be like, this is an example of evolution, and I'm absolutely right about that, but I can't say this is evolution. It's like, okay, but where is it? Because even evolution is talking as I'm saying it. So the meta-crisis is like that. It's where we find ourselves at this time in history, where we have multiple overlapping crises. The word crisis comes from the Greek word to discern or decide, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's not necessarily negative, but it certainly means that it's a tipping point where a decision has to be made about the future. And we have many of those. So we have climate change, of course. We have geopolitical instability, culture wars, political polarization, crisis of meaning, mental health crisis, all of this stuff at the same time. And that's, in the study of complexity and kind of complex systems and systems in general, they're what's called a wicked problem. So a wicked problem is that we just don't know how to fix it. We don't have solutions for it. And often that's what happens when the paradigm that we're trying to fix it from is out of date. So we need something new. And that's a very, very challenging place to be. And the temptation sometimes is to go, okay, like the New Age response is like, okay, we need to have a spiritual revolution where we transcend, and then there's all these ideas like, once 10% of the population become awake, and that's not really clearly defined what that means.
Yeah, what does that mean?
What does it mean? Then something, I think that's kind of fantasy. I think it's in a sense, I think it's based on some truth that, of course, our own individual level of maturity and connection to one another is vital in navigating the times. But it's not by itself magically going to fix everything. Because what we also need to change is the systems that we're part of and the incentive structures of those systems. So, there's a thinker, Daniel Schmachtenberger, who we used to have on Rebel Wisdom a lot, and he just describes it very simply as, if a whale is worth more on a boat than in the ocean, then there's going to be no more whales left, basically. So if the incentive structure of the system we're in tells us that, the environment is effectively, let's say that the world is not alive. It's kind of a dead machine. It works like a clock, this kind of enlightenment idea of what reality is, that the only thing that's real is stuff, is matter, which is incidentally the founding myth of our culture still today. If you go into psychedelic science, for example, they value quantitative data over qualitative data. So what can you measure rather than what's the experience of being you? Although the fallacy in it is, of course, that most of the questionnaires are just simply asking what was it like to be you during that experience, and then they collate those and make quantitative data out of it, which is, of course, valuable. You need both. But it's interesting to see where the power dynamic is, because if you want to do quantitative research, you're going to get a lot more money. And that's generally true. It's why we measure things in GDP rather than the lived experience of the people in a country, which would make a lot more sense, because the only thing we can really truly say is real philosophically, I'm of this school of thought, is that we are having an experience, that there's a qualia, that there's a qualitative experience that we're having. And everything else is that we agree, yes, I can also see the sun. You see the sun? Yeah, okay, well, is it doing the same thing for you as it's doing for me? Yeah, okay, great. But then we forget very quickly that we've made a logical leap to assume that what's more real is the sun than our experience of the sun. So I'm more of an idealist philosophically than a materialist. But to go back to the meta-crisis, the reason I bring that up is because I think the root of the meta-crisis is metaphysical. It's about what we think reality is. So we think reality is disparate units of unconnected quantities, whereas actually I think it's a living, breathing experience. And if we have that, we have a radically different way of treating one another, treating the natural world, if we switch that. But so in terms of psychedelics, how can these substances and experiences help us approach the meta-crisis? And one of my arguments in the book is that it's not so much the insights that we may gain from a psychedelic experience, which are valuable. And for example, I'm an advisor to Minds, which is Bruce Damer's not-for-profit, which is focused on psychedelic-assisted innovation and problem solving for humanity's greatest challenges. And, Bruce is a really accomplished scientist. He had an ayahuasca journey that helped him crack the chemistry of the origins of life, which has now become, the dominant theory. It's on the cover of Scientific American. He works for NASA too, so it changed where the Mars rovers went to find life. I mean, a major, major scientific discovery. Not the first that people have had on psychedelics. Carrie Mullis, who discovered the polymerase chain reaction, PCR, which is what we used during COVID, the test that allowed us to see COVID. He won the Nobel Prize, and he said that he didn't discover the reaction itself on LSD, but he did say had he not taken LSD, he never would have been thinking in the right way to have that insight. And I think that's really important, because it's not necessarily about the insight, even though that does matter. It's about the way psychedelics teach us how to think and be in the world. That's the very powerful thing. And they help us to navigate a complex environment, which we increasingly live in. And in fact, our environment is so complex, and it's so constantly changing and so uncertain that it's very challenging, because we either, Dan Siegel's window of tolerance model of, so I like to apply that to complexity, where we have a certain amount of complexity that we can tolerate, or uncertainty, and I think the two are quite related. And then once there's too much, we either go into hyper-arousal. So the version of fight or flight for this is, I think, ideological fixation. Like, listen, the world is not that complicated or complex because Marx has already figured it all out, right? Massive psychological relief that I get, someone can get from that, or libertarianism has figured it out, whatever the answer is, and it's wrong. There's just no way. It's too simple. Or the hypoarousal is checking out.
It's all too much.
It's all too much. You become apolitical, nihilistic, so it's just like, so how do we? I think it's one thing we really need to do during a meta crisis is increase our complexity tolerance, so that we can sit with the uncertainty of the time, because we're not going to solve the problem by jumping to solutions. We have to really be in a space of deep listening and deep receptivity, as well as agency. And one thing we need is heightened complexity tolerance. And I think psychedelics can absolutely give us that, because they are very complex. We literally know on the neurological level there's heightened complexity. You can experience, 3 thoughts at the same time. You can become a bird. You can become a grandmother. You can become you. All within 10-minute period, right? So it's that intensity. So we can apply that to other domains, like making sense of the world we're in.
Wow. That's such a comprehensive answer. I really love that. It's kind of like it's kind of I've gone into a like where to go with that. I suppose
complexity.
Complexity. Exactly. That's what it is. I'm going to check out. I might just check out and not ask you anything.
That's cool.
But in fact, I was talking to Marianne Murray, who's going to be on the panel with us next week. That's asking this question, around sort of healing the collective. And I sort of had to admit to, like I became that person. I kind of had to check out for a while, because there's this kind of sense that you can speak to a lot of people, and they sort of say, I don't listen to the news. I can't listen to the news. Yeah. I've had to turn it off. I've had to turn it off because it's just bringing me down. It's just bringing me down. I don't want that going on. And I was one of those people, I kind of did that. I was like, no, I can't do it. I can't do it. Until I met this person who just said to me, well, that's a very privileged position, isn't it? You've got there. And it just kind of, it was this bolt of like truth that just hit me in the heart and kind of going open. I was like, oh my God, I checked out, because I'm in a privileged position to be able to do that. And I suppose that is part of my, we talk about awakening. What is that? And maybe for me, that feels like that is the awakening, is actually, it is complex, and you don't have the answers necessarily, but you might as well kind of be curious about it and like know about it and think about it. And I suppose what I hear you saying is that psychedelics can be a part of that journey for well, I suppose that's the next question, is like, so are psychedelics for everyone? Do we get everyone to go,
No, I don't think so. I don't think anything's for everyone.
Right.
But I think
Complex.
Yeah. I think no, I don't think psychedelics are necessarily for everyone. But I think that they have a very important role to play. I mean, in a sense, they are for everyone because everyone. I believe in cognitive liberty, and I think anyone has a right to take psychedelics.
Yeah.
Of course, I think it's kind of a birthright. But in the sense that does everyone? What I took from your question was more like, does everyone need to take psychedelics for some level of insight? And I don't think that's the case. I do think everyone would benefit from practices that connect us to deeper levels of ourselves and to seeing the world more fully, and that can be meditation, breath work, therapy. There's so many practices, but kind of different for everyone. Everyone needs something a bit different. Yeah, but I do think psychedelics have a really important role to play in problem solving, creativity, finding new solutions, helping us connect deeply to one another. You mentioned like the raving, of course, like communitas, a sense of kind of social bonding that we can get, which we will seek out by raving, for example, or going to festivals or whatever it might be. And I think the reason that these practices are so important is, and this is the argument I make in the book, around why psychedelics can help us make sense of the world, drawing on cognitive science, and particularly John Vervaeke's work, who I mentioned. But what was really, when I was doing the research for the book, and of course I've been in this space for so long, but I was in this position where I had got a book deal and pitched psychedelics and systems change and making sense of the world, and then had an idea that they do, but then I thought, oh, now I really need to prove it. And it's like not enough to be like, trust me, guys, they definitely do. I was like, I'm writing like a popular science nonfiction book. I better. And it was actually it was a kind of not quite chance, but in a way, as I was writing it and pondering this, I was running a course with John called Embodiment and Flow. And as part of it, he mentioned, so there's this, in cognitive science, there's what's known as 4E cognitive science. And so that the argument is that, we used to think that our cognition comes from our brains, and that's where everything's happening. And that's why I think a lot of us, have some culturally embedded sense that we're like piloting a body from inside a brain somewhere, right? There's this idea of like, that's all in the brain, but this is a cultural obsession. But actually that's not the case, because cognition is embodied. So it's always about being in a body, and we think through our bodies. You can't think without a body, obviously. And, obviously we have a second brain in our gut. Everything is interconnected. So it's, you just very simply, if you're extremely hungry, you think differently. You make sense of the world differently than if you're not. It's also enacted. So it's always based on the interaction you have with the environment, what you're actually doing, the contact you're having, exchange with the environment. And it's embedded. So we're embedded in our environment. Like a whale is part of the ocean, and the ocean's, it's in a whale is only really a whale in the ocean if you put it on a skyscraper. It's not a whale for long, unfortunately, but it's also just not set up for that environment, and it's also extended. So it means that we think through one another. So we are constantly. There's a book called I think it's called Who. It's not called Who Sails a Ship, but that's the kind of core question of this scientist in it. It's like, well, you imagine you're like standing on a sailing ship, and you want to get across the ocean. You can't do it by yourself. You need to be in a whole system on the ship. One person's doing the sails, etc. But it's actually so much bigger than that. It's actually you're part of a much more global system. We're all connected to each other, and we think through each other. And then John said, almost offhand, he was like, I think there should be two more E's. And he said the first is emotion, because we do things because we care about them. That's really essential. So it's always related to emotion as well. And the other E was a word I'd never heard of, which was exaptation, which is a word from evolution. And no one had heard, like the 50 people I interviewed for the book, I think like one had heard of it. And they're all really kind of like accomplished thinkers in their fields. So, so exaptation is a term from evolution, and it's when evolution takes something that we already have, like a tongue, and repurposes it to another function, like speaking, right? So we already had tongues as primates, and many, chimpanzees have tongues, but they can't use them to speak. Because evolution is very efficient. Same with like feathers on birds. It's like, great, you got feathers for flying, let's use them for mating rituals as well, and change the color of them, so we don't have to make a whole new appendage or whatever it might be. And so the idea is that cognition works in the same way. So what you do in one domain is applied to other domains. So there's a researcher called Barbara Tversky, and she's done research pointing out that the way we talk about ideas is linked to the same cognitive machinery that we use to move through space. So the way that I stand up and walk across a room is the same kind of process going on when I think through an idea from A to B.
Interesting.
Right? Yeah, it's fascinating. And so that's why, and she points out, like, we even, in our language, we say, well, wherever you look up to that person, or, whatever it might be. So that's really interesting. And then, as I did more research on that, then it became clear that it actually goes much further, because it also means that if you learn a particular skill like tango dancing, then that skill will apply to other domains of your life. So, okay, what do you have to do? You have to know when to lead and when to follow. You have to be poised. You have to be in rhythm. You have to breathe properly. You have to have a sense of creativity in it. Showmanship, perhaps, and all of those things are useful in other domains, like starting a business or being in a relationship, etc. It's really great, isn't it? Yeah. So I got really excited, and then I thought, hang on a second. Then, if I have a psychedelic experience and I feel I'm in a forest and I feel the interconnectedness of the trees, and and the exchange of air between me and them, and if I'm aware of the fungal networks under my feet, and I can see, and we often have these experiences of deep interconnectedness on psychedelics, then actually that can be applied to other domains. And so then I thought, well, actually, the question is not so much like what insights might I get, but it's how can I apply a psychedelic way of being in the world to other domains, right? Like, yeah, which I think is what's needed. So it's like, think of like the least psychedelic place, like IBM or something, right? Like a boardroom in IBM. Yeah. And then imagine, like, what would a psychedelic approach be to decision making, to the way that they perceive what the company is and its duty and responsibility, that it's embedded in an environment, all of that. So that's where I think the real transformation lies, and that's the power of psychedelics.
That's incredible. Oh wow, thank you. I feel like you've just expanded my brain there. I mean, I think I understood that from your book, but somehow having you speak it and say it, it's like I kind of want the tango of psychedelics to kind of like take over my way of being. The way I get up and walk over to the door might be more of a creative way. Well, I suppose some people need to get up and just walk directly to the door, and it kind of gives purpose. I'm going to go straight to it. Yeah. But yeah, that's a really lovely way. It's almost like a meta response to the meta crisis, because it's a psychedelic way of thinking rather than the insights that the psychedelics give.
Yeah, exactly. And I think all we need to do is just change our frame about our experiences to help unlock a lot of creativity, because our culture is obsessed with the thing. It's leading to, like, what's the thing? What's the insight you had? What's the kind of, and that's partly, possibly because of our language being very noun focused. There's some theories around that. We're always looking for what's the noun, what's the thing, whereas other languages look more at the context of what's going on. So in that sense, like, we have to we have to just look from a different perspective, which of course psychedelics help us do, which is fantastic. So it's all about, that I think opens up a lot more possibility, because Terence McKenna said we should come back from the psychedelic experience with medium-sized ideas, and that's true. I do like that. But if you look at, like, Bruce Damer's example, the scientist I mentioned, he didn't have an ayahuasca trip where he just suddenly downloaded, cracked the chemistry code of this problem. He had been working on the problem with a Nobel Prize winning team for years. It's like you need to do the work. You have to actually have the foundational knowledge. What changed in that moment was the way he was thinking about the problem. He was thinking about it in a different way, with more cognitive energy, and of course with the wisdom of the ayahuasca and the experience and the ritual and the ceremony, all of that coming together in a particular way. And so it's cheesy, but in a way we have to just think about things in a different way, and that will unlock, I think, tremendous potential.
Yeah. So when you, you were talking about different practices, and you talk about an ecology of practices in your book.
Yeah.
Is that what you mean? Is that the actually?
That's that's a little bit different, and that's again actually a phrase I got from Vervaeke. So an ecology of practices, the idea behind that is that no single practice does everything. You can't use therapy for everything. You can't use meditation for everything. You can't use psychedelics for everything. And actually, I've noticed when people describe their healing journeys, especially from severe trauma or anything that's really taken a while, inevitably they're never like, it was this thing that did it. It's always, it was everything, and I couldn't really tell you what the one thing was. There were peaks and troughs. There were moments of like, yes, that therapy session really cracked something open, or that breathwork session really did something, but actually I never would have got there if I hadn't done this thing, right? So it's always this kind of much deeper contextual process. So an ecology of practices is that it's knowing when we need to, I like the idea that Vervaeke uses to explain this is like, sometimes we need practices that help us zoom in to the problem. Sometimes we need practices that help us zoom out and see the full context. But you kind of need both. And so different, even like mindfulness meditation is about taking a step back, decentering, and being aware of everything without judging it. So you get the full context and you're just with it. But actually concentration meditation, like a mantra, is not the same as that. It's about really focusing in the attention, and you get different brain changes, you get a different experience. Likewise, sometimes you need to really change the way you're narrating your experience and go to therapy, get really that kind of get into your unconscious and understand it. But sometimes you do need CBT because actually you've done that work and you just need to fix the problem is now the behavior, but likewise, you can't just, I think CBT doesn't work well for like, okay, we're going to go really into the depths and work with the transference between me and the therapist and all this different stuff. So I think you need both. Like you were saying before, you need the deep and the upper. So I think that's really what an ecology of practices is. It's figuring out how can I know what to use when. Yeah.
I think that's a really nice way to think about things, because I certainly notice in my private practice, people come with this kind of wild look in their eyes about like, it's about psychedelics. It's about psychedelics. And I suppose that could be part of the danger of a psychedelic renaissance.
Yeah.
In terms of how people are approaching the sort of silver bullet idea.
Yeah, I think so. I think, and that's partly the media narrative, because the media does see, it was like, okay, here's a mental health wonder drug. I think there's a narrative like of wonder drugs that the media likes because it's dramatic and it's like, wow, this could fix everything. And we see it now with like Manjaro and the weight loss drugs, which actually do seem to be very effective at lots of different things. So there is something probably to it, but the media spin often kind of things get carried away. And I think it's also because we're often really drawn to a quick fix. Like, who doesn't want a quick fix? Great. It's like, oh, fantastic, it's going to fix all my problems. But I think that generally nothing does that. There is no quick fix. You have to do the work. It's, at least my experience of life is you get out what you put in. And so I think that's just the nature of things. And there's con artists use the promise of everything. All your dreams will come true. And so if something's too good to be true, it is. That's my experience. I've not yet seen something that seems too good to be true and actually is. So I'm deeply suspicious of anything that appears to be.
Yeah. You, as you were speaking, you were sort of reminding me that in the book you talk about Ken Wilber and how you're kind of a fan of Wilber and integral studies. Could you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah. I mean, Wilber's work has been very influential on me, and I owe a lot to it. I'm also Jamie Wheel has a great line around this where he's like, integral is like the best operating system to understand and then forget about. By what he means by that is like, once you get too into the weeds, you forget that the map is not the territory,
right?
And it becomes its own sort of belief system, and I think that's a danger. But overall, I think it's a very important model, and people aren't familiar with it. It's a kind of quite complex system of spirituality and psychology, and a way to make sense of reality as comprehensively as possible. It doesn't claim to be like you're going to see all of reality, but it looks at different. One of the insights is that there's this kind of 4-quadrant model where you can split reality into I, we, it, and its, right? And so if we're talking about my experience of the psychedelic experience, that's the I. It's the inside of the I. It's like what my subjective experience was. But one of the things that they argue is that you can't take insights from that and then apply them to the it. So that I can say, I saw machine elves, therefore machine elves are real. It's like, no, the truth claim you could make is that you saw machine elves. The truth claims we make in it is science, where we go, okay, great, you saw machine elves, well, let's try and verify that so that we can see whether that's actually the case. And of course you can't, because it's an internal experience. So, and likewise, you can't take scientific insights and then make claims about the intersubjective experience of people, despite the fact that scientific materialists often do. So that's one insight, but there's many others. I found it just very useful for holding multiple perspectives at the same time, and also understanding this idea that there's multiple. Another Wilber insight I really like is that different people throughout history find different lines of human development, as he calls them. So, for example, Freud really plumbed the depths of like the psychosexual line, and like understanding that there's a part of us which is psychosexual identity, and it develops in a particular way, and there's particular rules around it, etc. But the fallacy that often happens is that someone finds a line and goes, this is all of reality. It's like, well, no, it's not, because there's many other aspects to identity. So it just gives that. I think what it did for me is, from a fairly early age, from maybe like 19, 20, when I kind of got into it, introducing me to the two ideas. One, that you can think in that way, and that felt very natural for me. And then two, that spirituality and deep inner processes can be looked at with a more kind of academic, robust model, rather than just the kind of, what you see in like Instagram or TikTok, of the sort of anything goes, mad, we're all from Lemuria, and whatever it might be, kind of thing. So that kind of robustness appealed to me as well.
Yeah. Thank you. I mean, we're coming up to the end now, so I could talk to you. I could keep talking to you and ask you lots of questions, but I kind of think maybe it'd be good to sort of come back. One question I did want to ask you around, but maybe people can read it in your book, because it's just beautiful the way that you intersperse your own DMT trip with on a DMT trial. And that, and you kind of bring it back to your own personal experience of what's going on in your life and how that's affecting you, and then sort of into the next chapter about how there's a sort of macro or zooming in and zooming out kind of effect, which is really such a nice way to write. So I mean, even now, like, this question doesn't seem quite right for having what you've said, but I might reframe it in terms of, like, do you think a psychedelic way of thinking will be able to drive a sort of systemic change in governance or economics or in the education system? Like, will it do? Is it about the personal work and living psychedelically and sort of spreading that, or with a more complex way of thinking? Is that the way forward? Is that how we're going to do it? Is it?
Yeah, it's a really important question. I think what's really important is that we have to then do the hard work of changing institutions and changing structures. So we can have, like, okay, for example, someone might work in local government and have a powerful psychedelic experience and start to really be living in a more, seeing things in more complex ways, etc. All the other kind of, feeling more interconnected, feeling more nature connected, all the other things that can happen in psychedelics. Mm-hmm. But if they just go to work and keep it to themselves, that's not change making, right? Mm-hmm. So what has to happen is that there has to be that conscious decision to make change happen. Mm. And that is not easy or sexy. That's, when you see people who actually change things in society, I have an enormous amount of admiration for people who have, spent 10, 15, 20 years changing something, some policy, some system, whatever it might be. Mm-hmm. That's the real work. There's no bypassing it. Right. And I think there can be mutual support and communities that form that provide sort of energy and impetus and accountability to one another. But basically, I think we have to infiltrate different institutions and bring a more loving, connected, complex, interesting, fun, playful approach that we learn from the psychedelic experience into them. But it's like the version of integration, basically. So the collective version of integration, which I've actually never thought of that.
That's brilliant.
These words before. Yeah. But yeah, the collective is action. That's the integration format.
So the collective integration is the movement. Yeah, is like the infiltration into. I mean, I suppose that's the thing, isn't it? Because it's when we look at what's going on in politics and kind of going, oh yeah, us and them. Well, it's like, well, is it though, or is that us as well? It's like,
exactly.
And so we're all getting older, and people like us are getting might be stepping into positions of power, and whether it's in corporations or different places in education and all this sort of stuff. So maybe that tipping point finally integrates and something changes. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
Wow. Do you think there's anything that that there's left over? There's something that you would like to say that I haven't asked you that could be quite important, or do you think we've sort of covered quite a lot there?
That's always my favorite question to end on as well. Nothing strong coming up. And I would say if people want to explore these ideas, definitely check out The Bigger Picture. Yeah. And I guess the final thing is we don't really know how to do this yet. We don't know how to do collective change, period, let alone collective change supported by, experiences like psychedelics. So I think I would just encourage people to be curious about it, and it's time for us all to experiment, play with it, share knowledge, share insights, and just be psychedelic in the process as well. And just, I think psychedelics are full of possibility as well. I think they open up possibility. And so just being in that attitude, I think, will help a lot too.
Ali, thank you for your thoughts. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you, and I feel like I've really kind of learnt a lot. I feel like I've really imbibed your philosophy. So hopefully I can dance out of the room today a little bit, kind of bigger,
more psychedelically.
More psychedelically. There you go. So,
well, thanks. It was a lot of fun. A pleasure.
Well, that wraps up another episode of the Emerging Purpose podcast. A huge thank you to Ali Beiner for joining us today and sharing his insights with our community. I really enjoyed a lot of that conversation, especially the stuff around the hyper-complexity tolerance. That's just a really amazing way to think about how we can tolerate this meta-crisis, or tolerate the kind of personal crisis that we go through on a daily basis. And being able to think about it with more psychedelic awareness. I love the what we were talking about just at the end there about infiltrating with psychedelic awareness. And actually, as a collective integration, what we need is action. And we're seeing that rise up around in these communities around the world now as well. So thank you, Ali, once again. Really good to talk to you. If you've enjoyed this conversation and you want to support the show, please do consider becoming a Patreon. And your support helps us continue bringing you these meaningful discussions about purpose and consciousness and what it means to be a human in our rapidly changing world. So until next time, keep exploring your emerging purpose.